This story, Kateryna's unicorn, is of course something of a fantasy. In accordance with long-held custom, Princess Kateryna was presented with a unicorn on her 5th birthday. Not just any unicorn, but a perfect specimen with a fleece of the purest white. Kateryna's unicorn had been trapped by Baron Nikolai and his huntsmen in the deepest forests of the Pripyat marshes, where the mists rise over the endless swathes of trees and lakes. There only the most fearless of men dare venture. Black monsters lurk there, and horror-inspiring tales abound of those who never returned, or worse, those who did return, but as wrecked men. A game befitting tradition. A nobleman who had demonstrated the fortitude and skill to capture such a specimen of unicorn would be granted a singular privilege. At the proper time he would be permitted to present a scion of his own household for the honour of asking for the princess's hand in marriage. This tradition ensured that only the bravest and best of noble blood would continue to invigorate the royal lineage. The unicorn that had been captured by Baron Nikolai was a youngster, newly weaned. She stood about as tall as a she-goat, with her tiny horn no longer than the span of a man's hand. Even at this age she had the feisty characteristics of all of her kind, for unicorns from the Pripyat marshes were renowned for their spirited temperament. No one could remember the last time that anyone had succeeded in trapping a full-grown specimen, on account of their shy, reclusive, yet aggressively high-strung nature. Moreover, most unicorns are not the snowy white creatures of art and legend with their shiny fleece, noble carriage, and long, perfectly formed spiral horns. Rather, most unicorns possess a rough coat of russet brown and a horn that might be twisted or even broken from contests during the rutting season. Not, however, this perfect specimen. The little unicorn was introduced to Princess Kateryna as she sat on a throne of the finest and costliest damask silk. The young princess gazed imperiously at Baron Nikolai as he entered the chamber, with the unicorn unceremoniously entrapped in a crate. Though it was no ordinary crate, it boasted elegantly turned wooden bars that had been gilded by the finest craftsmen of the kingdom. Nonetheless, a crate it was, to protect the Baron and his attendants from the ire of the beautiful, yet angry, hissing creature confined within. The Baron himself released the catch of the little unicorn's prison, while taking pains to keep a steady hold on the chain around the unicorn's neck, for he knew full well that should harm come to this singular issue of the royal household, it will be another neck that will be the subject of attention, and that neck might well become separated from the rest of its corporality. But upon sighting the princess, the unicorn at once became calm. She trotted carefully, with neither haste nor delay, towards the princess's throne, where she lay her head demurely into the young girl's lap. Profound sighs of relief escaped the lungs of the Baron and of the members of his entourage. Instinctively, however, the unicorn knew that she should shed all her wild abandon in the company of a maiden. Just indeed as great artists depict the unicorn's pose in the lap of the Blessed Virgin, when the angel Gabriel announces the coming birth of the Christ child. In these scenes, the unicorn's pure white coat mirrors the incarnate purity of the Virgin, and thus unicorns symbolize maidenly purity when presented as companions to the daughters of the nobly born. It's remarkable that an animal as wild and tempestuous as a unicorn could become as tame as a lapdog, but it was so. The unicorn would follow Princess Kateryna wherever she went, almost like a living shadow. She slept on the princess's coverlet. She ate her meals from a little silver dish, while Kateryna herself dined at her table. And she was, from that first day, completely housebroken. When the princess took her lessons with Signor Maccarelli, her Italian tutor, the unicorn would lie quietly on a rug fashioned from finest silk, with her head and horns stretched out for her. When the princess would invite other nobly born friends for play, the unicorn would watch quietly as the children's games played themselves out around her. Unicorns may indeed act as companions and protectors of young maidens, but they are by no means domesticated animals. So let no one, child or adult, even the highest born in the land, seem to threaten the princess, even in the mildest and most inadvertent manner. For the little creature would spring to her mistress's defence, and onlookers would at once be reminded of a unicorn's natural temperament. Years passed, and as the princess grew and matured, so the unicorn grew with her, almost as if step kept pace with step. By the time of the princess's 12th birthday, the unicorn stood as tall as a small pony. And though of course no one ever rides a unicorn, as those who have tried have learned to their cost. Princess Kateryna's playmates included the two sons of Baron Nikolai, Pyotr and Alexei. Pyotr was a year older than Kateryna, Alexei the equivalent age younger. Pyotr was the pride of his father, brave but reckless. From the youngest age, Pyotr rode to the hunt and practiced both archery and swordsmanship. By the age of 13, he began to acquire the telltale signs of impending manhood, broadening shoulders and deepening voice. This growing masculinity made him the pride of his male relatives and the envy of his fellows. But his vulgarity tended to repel the fairer sex, and even as young children he and Kateryna were never close. By contrast, Alexei was considered to be something of a mother's boy, delicate and polite, a lover of books over hunting and of painting over swordsmanship. He was, needless to say, a great disappointment to the Baron, who wondered how such a dilution of his virile and aristocratic bloodline could possibly have come about. Alexei and Kateryna had been closest of friends as long as either could remember. Kateryna and Alexei were model pupils, eagerly enhancing their vocabularies in French and Italian, and dreaming the tales of Roland and courtly love. However, Pyotr paid little attention to his studies. He preferred to gaze out of the windows, where his dreams centred upon the exciting masculine activities that lay behind and beyond the confines of the classroom. He treated his studies and Signor Maccarelli with barely disguised contempt. Of course, it was Pyotr that the Baron Nikolai always imagined that he would offer to the princess's parents as his choice for the son to take Kateryna's hand in marriage. Through their childhood, Kateryna had never given much thought to the life that had been planned for her. The love of her parents and of the unicorn, along with friendship from her young intimates with the attention of her lady attendants, had led her to imagine life as an infinite extension of her privileged childhood. This began to change when Kateryna passed her 12th birthday. Her childish chest began to bud out, and she took on the gawkiness of prepubescence. Meanwhile, her older female relatives and ladies in waiting began to drop hints that she would soon become a woman, and it would be time to start thinking about items for her trousseau. Comments were also passed. How strong and handsome Pyotr was becoming. What a fine man he would turn out to be. How lucky a girl would be to offer her a husband such as he. All this filled Kateryna with dread and apprehension. Having known Pyotr all her life, she knew that he would be a singularly unsuitable match for her, and result in a cheerless and loveless marriage. She could see no kindness or consideration in his demeanour, and already he was starting to behave towards Kateryna as if she was part of his property or his inheritance. Besides, there was already within the orbit of Kateryna's life the more sensitive and scholarly Alexei, with whom she could readily imagine spending a life together. Already they shared their hopes and dreams and their most intimate thoughts. Fortunately, the princess was still only 12 years old, and the matter of a royal marriage would not become reality until she reached her 16th birthday. Kateryna therefore tried her best to put all thoughts of her more distant future from her mind. None of this went unnoticed by Kateryna's unicorn, which began to eye Pietro with increasingly undisguised hostility. As the months turned to years, the animosity between Pietro and Kateryna's unicorn became increasingly evident. The unicorn would hiss aggressively whenever they met, which was often on account of the group tutorial classes that the three children took. Pietro, filled with adolescent impetuosity, would glare back at the unicorn. The matter came to a head one day when Pietro kicked the unicorn as he passed. It was not a savage kick, and the unicorn was not hurt, but she was nevertheless enraged. She lunged forward and bit Pietro deeply on the leg, drawing blood and leaving a huge welt even through his pantaloons. Pietro retaliated by kicking the unicorn again, this time savagely, and the unicorn reared up to butt its head forcefully into Pietro, who was rendered nearly senseless when his head crashed against the opposite wall. Fortunately, the unicorn had charged with her head down, so that her horn did not strike the boy, otherwise he might well have been fatally gored. Resultant shouting, screaming and crying brought various attendants to the room. Pietro declared he would no longer take tutorial classes unless the unicorn was absent. Kateryna insisted that wherever she went, the unicorn would go too. Alexei supported Kateryna, agreeing that the contretemps had been initiated by his brother rather than by the unicorn. This earned him long-standing disapproval from Baron Nikolai. Thus ended Pietro's studies in French and Italian, to his mother's dismay. By contrast, the Baron was secretly delighted at the assertive role that Pietro had played in the drama. Although he had been the original donor of the unicorn, he had come to feel that the unicorn played far too great a part in Kateryna's life. He was less than unhappy at the thought the creature might find itself banished back to the Pripyat marshes before the nuptials between his son and the princess could come to pass. He did worry, however, that the episode might reflect poorly on Pietro in the eyes of the royal household, especially Kateryna's parents. Might they rescind the prospective privilege that they had granted to the family all those years ago? Inevitably and inexorably, the princess's 16th birthday eventually arrived. On the day of Kateryna's betrothal, the whole court was in attendance. Kateryna, once again enthroned, was attired in a gown of purest white silk, her head crowned with a diamond-encrusted tiara. The unicorn sat as usual with her head in the princess's lap. Baron Nikolai, resplendent in tall, full court uniform, placed his sword on a velvet-covered stand before the Grand Duke's throne and bowed deeply. Respected Majesty and eternal grace, he began, using the time-honoured words. I come to lay claim to the privilege which your grace granted me on the occasion of your daughter Kateryna's 5th birthday. Your Majesty may recall that on that occasion I presented her with a unicorn of the most pure and immaculate fleece. I now pray that your grace will permit my son Pietro to take the hand of your daughter, the Princess Kateryna. I ask that they may be betrothed one to the other, that these two young people may be made ready for joining their hands and hearts in holy matrimony, and to make our two families into one. The Grand Duke rose from his throne and seized the Baron familiarly by the shoulders. Baron Nikolai, it is my will and God's will that our two noble families should be united with the marriage of your son Pietro to my daughter Kateryna. May the love that we bear for each other as brothers in arms be reflected in the love that will grow between our two children and between all the various and several members of our households. You, Nikolai, will be as a brother to me and I as to you. My daughter Kateryna will be a daughter to you, and your son Pietro will be a son to me. To your request I hereby give my consent in the presence of all the noble families of the kingdom. The Grand Duke beamed at the Baron, and the Baron beamed back at the Grand Duke, and likewise their respective wives. Tumultuous applause arose from the assembled court and courtiers. It was difficult to determine whether Pietor's face was contorted into a rictus of pleasure, of a leer, or of triumph. But to those whose eyes were so directed, it was clear that his brother Alexei bowed his head to the floor and gave only muted applause to the announcement. And it was even more obvious to those at the fore of the assembly that Princess Kateryna's smile appeared to be pasted onto her face, and that her eyes filled with tears that trickled down her trembling cheeks. But the celebratory moment was shattered when the unicorn, by now full grown in both body and tusk, rose from the lap of Princess Kateryna and raised itself to full height. Then, snorting wildly, she lowered her head and charged into the hated Pietor. Her single horn thrust itself deeply into the young man's entrails, emerging a blooded red from his back. Applause turned to shock and cheers to screams as the men of the company attempted to throw themselves onto the unicorn, a hopeless gesture of trying to save Pietor from the unicorn's wrath. But it was all in vain. With a vigorous thrust and shake of the head, the unicorn's horn broke itself away from the creature's head, leaving Pietor impaled on the white but blooded tusk, while his spirit drained away with the lifeblood that gurgled from his mouth. In that moment, the unicorn's appearance changed. No longer a creature with soft, pure white fleece and gentle brown eyes. Instead, there appeared a wild, red-eyed beast with a rough red-brown and shaggy coat. The brute frothed at the mouth, stamped its hooves, and snorted with near maniacal hostility. She turned, kicked the dying Pietor violently with her powerful rear legs, and charged from the throne room. Reaching the gardens, she cleared the palace wall in a single bound and disappeared forever into the forest. A horrified silence descended upon the gathering. Baron Nikolai took the corpse of his firstborn son in his arms and carried him from the throne room, followed by his loudly wailing wife. Princess Kateryna, pale, shocked, and with her white gown stained scarlet by her would-be fiancé's blood, stepped tremulously down from her throne and fell sobbing into the Grand Duke's arms. Her parents led her away into the private quarters of the palace. The remaining dignitaries dispersed. Royal servants appeared in the now deserted throne room to remove the visual evidence of what had just transpired. So now must end this tale of courtly love. With Pietor's life extinguished, Baron Nikolai had little choice but to present his younger son Alexei to the Grand Duke to take the Princess Kateryna's hand. This he did on Alexei's 16th birthday. Although the same form of words was used as the previous year, the ambience of this occasion was markedly more muted, since the hearts and minds of all present were preoccupied by memories of that earlier tragedy. Despite the less festive aura, this time the princess smiled a smile of untarnished joy when the Grand Duke pronounced his consent to the match. And although the Baron continued to have concerns concerning the manliness of his poetry-loving, Italian-speaking heir, the thought of relinquishing his hard-won privilege had been too frightful to contemplate. And so it was, despite the doubts and perhaps resignation of their parents, that Alexei and Kateryna were joined in holy matrimony. And later, after the marriage, when the two young people's love had been consummated, all initial anxiety over the match and over Alexei's virility turned to unalloyed joy when Alexei and Kateryna produced 4 children, first 2 little princes and then later 2 little princesses.